Foreign Affairs Committee said some diplomats went above and beyond to help people get home. But the MPs said too many UK citizens were not given the support they should expect from the Foreign Office. The repatriation was too slow, they said. It relied too much on commercial flights, which many could not access or afford. They urged the Foreign Office to improve its communication methods and its contingency plans. A Foreign Office spokesman said it had taken unprecedented steps to help people, and it had not been realistic to charter more flights.
It's emerged that some asylum seekers have been living in shared rooms with strangers during the coronavirus pandemic. A highly critical report from the Commons Home Affairs Committee also reveals that some claimants have been unable to get hold of even basic cleaning products like soap. The Home Office says it's introduced a range of measures to support asylum seekers affected by the pandemic. Amazon is planning a big expansion of its online grocery delivery service with the aim of serving millions of customers across the UK by the end of the year. Amazon Fresh is currently available only in London and the home counties, but as our business correspondent Emma Simpson reports, the online giant is now seeking a much bigger slice of the grocery market.
Could Amazon do to groceries what it's done to books? It's long been a burning question in retail. So far, its ambitions have been fairly modest, and it's barely made a dent in the UK food market. You have to be an Amazon Prime member to use Amazon Fresh, and the service came with an extra monthly fee or delivery charge per order. Now this online giant is upping the ante. From today, subscribers can use Amazon Fresh for free. It's also promising a faster same-day delivery service to be rolled out across major cities. Online grocery sales have almost doubled since lockdown, with retailers struggling to keep up with demand. But Amazon's expansion and deep pockets will be a cause for concern in an already crowded, competitive market where profit margins are wafer thin.
Scientists have found kelp off the coast of Scotland and Ireland that survived since the last ice age 16,000 years ago. It's hoped the discovery could help show how marine plant life survives extreme changes in climate. Here's Adam Porter.
Researchers, including some from Heriot-Watt University's Orkney campus, analysed the genetic composition of the kelp oarweed from 14 areas across the northern Atlantic Ocean and found 3 distinct clusters. Samples taken from Scotland and Ireland are more closely related to populations in the high Arctic than to a cluster found off Brittany. Scientists in Portugal and France also took part in the study and say the findings show how marine organisms adjust to shifting climates by migrating to areas where conditions are more favourable. But they warn that some clusters of kelp are projected to disappear if greenhouse gas emissions continue.
And that was Adam Porter.
Thank you. 7:09 is the time. Why not eliminate or reduce the time needed for quarantine for Brits returning from abroad by having tests at the airport, either in Spain as they leave or at the airport here when they get back? I've been talking to David Evans, who runs the global travel security firm Collinson, and to Ramon Estarella, who is the Secretary General of the Spanish Tourist Hotels Confederation. And he began by telling me the impact that Britain's quarantine has had on Spain.
It's going to be huge, no? It's going to be huge for the hoteliers. It's going to be huge for all the complementary industry. It's going to be huge for the British travel industry. It's going to be incredible because we are expecting this year, let's say, half of the normal British tourist movement. That means more than 2 million people coming and staying in our country like always do, no? So it's going to be... There are some people who are just making their first figures, and we are coming over 100 million euros per day.
That you're losing?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And to make up for that, or to try to encourage that not to be the case, you're offering to pay for tests, are you? How do you think it could work?
I think because what we have now is a sanitary crisis, it's a confidence crisis, no? So why to confine, healthy people, for 14 days? This is nobody's going to travel with this thing. So what we are offering is to have, and we are asking at the European level to have tests for everybody just going in and going out, not only thinking in tourism, but also thinking in residence, no? So it's not that difficult to make this is fast test. No, you can take it in 8 minutes. They can tell you if you are affected or no. And if you are, then there is the other test, the PCR. No, I am not a doctor, but I cannot understand why we are not financing tests for the people to give them the confidence to travel and to come back, and not to because this pandemic, the only way to solve it is just with sanitary measures.
David Evans, could it be done?
Yeah, absolutely, it can be done. You know, we've been talking to the government for well over 6 weeks, probably 2 months now, about introducing tests in the UK here for inbound travellers to ensure that when people come back, we put a filter on and we make sure that those who have been exposed to the virus, who are showing, who come up positive in the PCR test, which is well before symptoms would come through, would go into the quarantine for the 14 days. Those who come up negative would be released back in to get on with their lives. That gives people the confidence to travel, and that means they can travel to Spain, to Germany, to even to the US at this point in time, and we can really get economies moving again.
Why are we not doing it?
I think, in my opinion, I think what's happening at the moment is we've got a very cautious period. I think we didn't shut the borders at a time when possibly we did, and I think now the government is very cautious about reopening them up. I think what we've got to do is believe that we've opened the borders to a number of countries. We've seen the government apply the handbrake. Now what we've got to do is put testing in place to bring that level of risk from what are called red countries back in line with the green countries to mitigate risk, not to totally eliminate it, because you never can.
And the cost, Ramon Estrella, do you understand what that cost would be? And are people genuinely, is your organisation among others, genuinely willing to come up with the money?
But the cost is nothing compared with the money we can lose. No? We are speaking the most expensive test is going to be like 60 euros per person, and the cheapest one is like 12 euros per person. So that means in a week of package holiday, there's the average, you know, we are doing. That is nothing compared to what we are losing, you know. So, and we are losing the confidence of the people, or the confidence of traveling. So, and it's going to be very hard to come back, you know. So that's why we must do a big effort, you know, investing in order to maintain the airlines traveling and flying, and to have the hotels open. You know, and can you imagine all our, you know, all the workers and the people who are working in the hotels? We can afford to lose everything for the cost of the test.
David Evans, well, the cost of the test at the moment, David Evans, of your company's test is £150, isn't it? Could it, if it were used really widely, could that cost be brought down?
That cost could be brought down. It could be subsidised by hotel groups, airlines. The government could look to do the subsidies. There's no doubt about it. That cost to the passenger can be brought down. We've seen in Germany them bringing in mandatory testing from risk countries. That's being funded by the government. You see a mixed in Munich airport where inbound is funded, outbound is paid for. There's lots of different options that we could do. The key here is the government to bring this into their armoury and to make testing part of a whole host of different measures to make sure that we can get things moving again.
David Evans and Ramon Estrella, thank you both very much.
7:15 now. Greggs has been one of the big retail successes of recent times. How did they fare through lockdown, though? Their latest results have just been released, and Dom's been looking at them, Dom?
Yes, Michelle, these are half-year results, so the 6 months to the end of June. They shut all 2,000 stores at the start of the lockdown in March, so unsurprisingly, it's a loss of £65 million. It made a profit of £37 million at the same point last year. Has been reopening some shops in the last month or so. Roger Whiteside is the chief executive. Mr. Whiteside, good morning. How are you progressing with the shop openings?
Good morning. Well, 3 weeks ago, we reached a point where we'd reopened all of our shops, bar 7 that we'd left closed in the Leicester region. And I have to say, we've been really quite encouraged with how they've started to trade, given the fact that so many people are still obviously working from home, and footfall figures show that there are very few people about. So we're trading now already at 72% of 2019's levels, which, as I say, I think is really quite encouraging and ticking along in the right direction as obviously people become more confident and start to move about again.
It's curious, isn't it? Because I think most people would have thought that you rely heavily on office workers being in the office shopping at Greggs, but you've got 3/4 of your demand back even with most people still working from home.
Yes, well, that's the interesting thing, that obviously people have thought that would be the case for Greggs, but in fact, later on this morning I'll be presenting to shareholders and analysts to show that the vast majority of Greggs customers simply can't work from home. So office workers form a portion of our customer base, but the vast majority, over 80%, simply can't work from home or aren't working at all. They're students or retired or whatever. So yes, there's some exposure to office working, but it's certainly not as complete as some people might think. So we're more resilient than many other brands because of the broad appeal of the type of products that we sell to all types of customer, and the location. I mean, 2,000 locations. Yes, some of them are near offices, but the vast majority are nowhere near offices. The ones that have been most affected have been those next to public transport, where we're 65% down, because simply people just aren't using those shops. And then those in city centres and office-based working, which are down 45%. But the majority of our shops are in local towns and suburbs, or in locations which are accessed by car, and car travel is obviously picked up as a result of public transport going down. So, we've got compensating areas doing better to compensate for those areas that are office-bound, if you like, but obviously not doing as well.
Well, we've been speaking to a lot of retailers on this programme in recent weeks, and many of them are having to make tough decisions about whether they keep staff on because the furlough's coming to an end. Given you're encouraging trading, do you think you'll be able to keep all your staff?
Well, we've managed to bring back about 75% of our... we employ 25,000 people. We've brought back about 75% at the current levels of demand. Obviously, we want that demand, the rest to remain on furlough, and we want that demand to keep moving up so that we create more work for more people to come back to work. So, I remain hopeful that we've got until the end of October for that trend to continue. And who knows? The thing about this whole environment is it's the uncertainty. Who knows when things might change and how things might get better or indeed get worse. So what we've shown is that we're prepared and able to react and adapt to whatever the conditions are that are thrown at us. But obviously, I want to be optimistic about the possibility that the economy can continue to get back to normal, whatever that is, in the course of the next few months until the end of October when the furlough scheme ends. So certainly we intend to continue using the furlough scheme to support those jobs whilst we can.
Thank you very much, Roger Whiteside from Greggs.
Dom, thank you. It's 19 minutes past 7. Late at night 10 days ago, armed police went to an address in North London after receiving a report from a passerby that there was a male with a gun inside the property. It was the home of a black family, and the male turned out to be a 12-year-old with a toy gun. His mother has filed a complaint with the Metropolitan Police about the way the incident was handled. Officers told her afterwards that the report they received said that there was a non-white male with a gun. Mina Ajapong is the mother of 12-year-old Kai, and she's on the line now. Good morning.
Morning.
Take us back to that night. What was the first that you knew of something happening?
There was huge commotion outside in the hallway. Kai and myself was in the living room, so the police was shouting, armed police, open the door. And, Kai opened the door, and it was just like a movie. There was loads of police, at least 4 or 5 police officers at my front door with huge rifles, wearing sort of riot gear, visors and lasers, red lasers. And they were sort of on Kai, on myself. I've got 2 other daughters who had come down at that point. And, at no point did I think we wasn't going to get shot. These are very serious police officers. And we immediately put our hands up. Kai had his hands up, and they arrested Kai. Kai was clearly a 12-year-old boy. He actually had no top on. He had just jogger bottoms on. And he was handcuffed, and he's behind his back and led away. And then me and my 2 daughters were led out the property at gunpoint. One by one. I wasn't allowed to leave together, so I had to leave my girls at home because I was the second person to leave the property. Then my 23-year-old, and then my 16-year-old, and then we was outside for an hour whilst the police raided my house for what we had was a toy gun, which I explained to them when they came to the...
Right, that's what I want to know. How soon? So they're at your door, they're shouting armed police. How... I mean, did you realise immediately that it was the toy gun that was probably responsible for this?
Not straight away, because I was kind of shocked, really, that they was even at my house. But I remember sort of saying to them that we don't have any firearms, we don't have anything, we haven't done anything wrong, all we have is a toy gun in the property. And the toy gun would have been in my living room on the side. I believe that's where the passerby said it was.
So they would have seen it pretty quickly?
Pretty quickly, yeah. So, yeah, and they continued to, to raid my home for over an hour, even after finding this. So, and, I understand a passerby might not know the difference, or, might perceive anything they've seen through, half-drawn blinds, but police are trained to distinguish real firearms from BB toy guns because they're two-tone.
And when you spoke to officers afterwards, I know one of the inspectors had a conversation with you. Did he tell you that the initial report from that passerby said it was a non-white male with a gun?
He did, yeah.
And do you think that influenced the way that the police responded? Because they have said that what they did was normal protocol in the circumstances, which were that they had a report of a male with a handgun.
Sure. An unsubstantiated report from a passerby that there's a handgun in a house is very, very scant evidence, really. And what they sent to my house, as in the police, their response was the sort of response you'd expect for a hostage situation in public, where lives are in imminent danger. So I struggle to find that the police have the resources to send out that level of force and response to, claims from the public in the facts of what happened with my family. I don't accept that, and I think that young black boys are, in my opinion, targeted by police. Even just stop and search is so much more disproportionate for people like my son Kai, and this is probably the most hardest stop and search you can find, guns pointing at you. And I do believe that it was a factor because they didn't have much else to go on. The report was not very detailed. It was unsubstantiated, and they have to accept also that BB guns are in circulation in the UK. They are legal, and let's not forget that Kai wasn't doing anything wrong at all. He was just at home, a normal 12-year-old boy, and the police burst into the house, and he could have been killed.
How is he?
He's traumatized. I mean, he's scared in terms of who could be at the door, because now that's a potential, and he's nervous, but I hope that he will get better. But I do worry about how he now feels about the police, and like I said, he's not fully a teenager, although that he's been referred as that in by the police. He's 12, and he's a little young boy, but I hope that he does kind of get over this and put it behind him.
What are your options? I know that you've filed a complaint. I think there's also a call for the Met to release the body cam footage of the incident. One of the senior officers who says he has personally watched the body-worn video says that he's content that the officers were professional throughout and took time to explain to the residents what was happening and why. What do you think of that? How does it compare to your experience?
Sure. I mean, I would say that, again, I struggle to see how there was professionalism when actually it was a toy gun. A toy gun in the UK. This is London, not America. And, there should have been more of a considered assessment based on the reports that the police received, that could have been a possibility. They have intelligence. They can find out who probably lives in properties. It's a family home. And I don't believe that the police should be pursuing crime or trying to, save members of the public at the cost of killing innocent people in their home who have done nothing wrong. So that's exactly what could have happened.
You feared for your life. You thought they might open fire?
There was no question at all. They did not just come to my house to make inquiries. They had rifles pointed to me, my son, my family, the whole time. They did not. I asked them to lower their guns because I don't have anything and my children are not armed, and they wouldn't. And they had their red laser light aimed at my head, my children's heads, Kai's head, at all times. And at no point did they lower their guns. And we was led out at gunpoint.
Nina Ajapong, thank you very much for talking to us. We have raised this with the Equalities Minister, and we'll run that interview after 8 o'clock. Thank you.
27 minutes past 7 is the time now, and we turn to Rob with sport.
Morning, Justin. If the weather holds good today, and it's expected to be a vast improvement on yesterday's Old Trafford washout, well, then England should press home their advantage established on Sunday and take both the third test and the series against the West Indies by 2-1 on today's last day. And not even Sir Vivian Richards, you'd think, would have been able to turn around a situation in which his side needed another 389 runs to win, with just 8 second innings wickets remaining. More in an hour on this, and commentary later, of course, on Test Match Special. On BBC Sport's website this morning, details of Fulham's 2-0 win at Cardiff in the first leg of their Championship playoff semi-final, plus an investigation into the delayed takeover of Newcastle United. The Premier League is believed to be concerned about a lack of clarity concerning control of the club in the present Saudi-backed proposal. But now we're focusing on the first day of the traditional summer meeting at Goodwood Racecourse, with all eyes on whether Stradivarius can win the Goodwood Cup for the 4th successive year. But it's also a chance to speak to the horse's businessman owner, Bjorn Nielsen, about the state of the racing industry. And fair to say, there are problems.
Obviously, we need to win prize money to pay the bills. It's a very difficult thing to do in England compared to, Australia and France, the US. The prize money's, quite poor in this country. And with the COVID crisis, halved or a third again in all the big races. But I don't really look at it from a prize money angle. Obviously I just want to see the horse win these big races.
Would you say that the racing industry has been deeply damaged by the Covid-19 crisis?
I think it's very difficult for a lot of owners, more so than it ever was before, as the prize money levels are so poor. And, you're probably going to see some people leave the game this year. Some trainers probably will too. It's a difficult game to make it pay at the best of times, let alone now. But, that's the same as a lot of other industries who are struggling. Everybody's having a hard time, and, a lot of people lost jobs and a lot of people have been sick, so we're not alone.
Do you see any optimism at the moment about the way out of this financial difficulty?
It's always darkest before it's light, and you always get crisis before you get change. I'd like to think that whatever happens, at the end of the day, prize money levels will be negotiated, and, one would hope there's going to be some improvement, some catch-up with other countries. So we will see.
Attracting sponsorship money, presumably, isn't it, Bjorn? And that depends on the state of the economy.
Sponsorship is part of it. There's TV rights money, which is a bone of contention right now between horsemen and race courses. And there's the betting levy. There are a number of factors. But, on Saturday, I think they're having their first small crowd at a race meeting in this country with, 5,000 members of Goodwood allowed in.
And that has to be a significant step in the right direction, wouldn't you say?
For sure. This COVID crisis, nobody really knows, I don't think, where it's going, and everything has to be step by step. Then when you get flare-ups, there will be, I'm sure, further restrictions, and that's just the way it has to be, before hopefully one day we get back to having full race courses and football stadiums, and, hopefully that comes at some stage in the next year. I guess there's going to have to be a vaccine or something before that really happens, and, a lot less illness.
Bjorn Nielsen, thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Rob.
And, of course, our tips today come from the meeting at Goodwood. In the 2:45, we're going for number 11, Sir Dancelot, and in the 3:15, the Goodwood Cup, number 7, Santiago, second favourite to Stradivarius.
Rob, thank you very much. Now, this weekend we revisit a US election like no other through the eyes of the late Alistair Cooke.
On BBC Radio 4, the clash between a president and a rival from his own party.
Today I formally announce that I'm a candidate for President of the United States.
A US election like no other.
Following American politics is rather like trying to learn another form of chess.
Delegation deeply divided between Carter and Kennedy delegates.
The 1980 Democratic Convention, retold through Alistair Cooke's Letter from America.
Jobs, race, housing, healthcare, and the Democratic Party.
The Crunch Convention, this Saturday night at 8 on Radio 4 and BBC Sounds.
Look at the weather. It's going to be cool and breezy. Very British if you happen to be staying here for your holiday. A mixture of sunny spells and showers.
You're listening to Today on Radio 4 with Justin Webb and Michelle Hussein, and just after 7:30 with a summary of the news from Charles Carroll.
The government is facing growing criticism of its decision to add the Balearic and Canary Islands to its advice to avoid all but essential travel to Spain. It was the third announcement about travel to Spain in 3 days. The Spanish Prime Minister said it was unjust that people arriving in the UK from Spain would have to quarantine for a fortnight. The chairman of the Equality and Human Rights Commission has accused the government of failing to make racism a priority. David Isaac, who's due to leave his role next week, has told this programme that ministers have dragged their feet on the issue. The government says it's committed to tackling racism. People in England will be offered £50 bike repair vouchers in an effort to encourage cycling and tackle obesity. An initial 50,000 vouchers will be made available online on a first-come, first-served basis, but the NHS will be given funding to provide bikes to people to boost their fitness. The former Prime Minister of Malaysia, Najib Razak, has been found guilty of all 7 charges in the first of several multi-million-dollar corruption trials which are linked to the country's 1MDB sovereign wealth fund. He had pleaded not guilty to the charges of criminal breach of trust, money laundering and abuse of power, and could now face decades in prison. New research has shown how the Covid-19 crisis is seriously worsening the nutrition of children in developing countries. The medical journal The Lancet says that an extra 6.7 million under-5s could be at risk. A British-Australian woman who's serving a 10-year prison sentence in Iran has been transferred to a notorious jail in the desert, according to human rights activists. Kylie Moore-Gilbert is a Cambridge-educated academic who was in Iran for a conference in 2018 when she was arrested on spying charges and convicted at a secret trial. And scientists have found clusters of Atlantic kelp off the coast of Scotland, Ireland and France that have survived since the last ice age, 16,000 years ago. They've described them as refugee populations, which coped with the retreat of the ice sheets and managed to recolonize the higher latitudes of the Atlantic Ocean.
Thanks, Charles. 26 minutes to 8 now. How can the test and trace system for England link in better with local councils? In the weeks since it went into operation, directors of public health have said that they'd like more information from it so that they can act more effectively at the local level. Well, the chief executive of Leeds City Council, Tom Riordan, served for 11 weeks as the programme's lead on Contain, which is the part of the programme that meant dealing with local flare-ups. He's now handed over that role to another local government chief executive, but he's on the line now. Good morning, Mr. Riordan.
Morning, Michelle.
What is your conclusion as you come to the end of your time with Test and Trace about how the system might be able to work better?
I think it's working actually pretty well now. We're reaching about 8 out of 10 people to test and then contact their recent contacts, and that's in line with what Sage was advising needed to happen. What I think we need to do now is make sure that we're dealing with flare-ups as they happen and getting a really strong partnership between national and local government to do that. And we've created a system whereby every part of England now has a plan to do that. About 20 or 30 of these outbreaks are happening every day, and they're being dealt with very effectively by directors of public health and teams on the ground. So I think we're in a pretty good place now.
Yeah. Isn't it the case, though, that rather varies depending on where in the country you are, and some of the areas with the highest infection rates are also the areas where a lower proportion than what you say in terms of contacts are traced once people test positive. What does that suggest to you about about the link between the national and the local system. So as Bradford Council, which is one of those areas that's had a really hard time, has asked the government for a local extension to the national test and trace system so that any uncontacted data, they can follow up with door-to-door visits.
Yeah, and Bradford are already doing that extremely well, working with local faith communities, local teams on the ground, and other parts of the country are doing that as well. In Leicester, that's been trialled. And I think that's probably the next stage, where we get these really sort of insistent bits of the infection. We can't quite shift it down in a way that has been done across the rest of the country. And I think linking up with particularly people who we can't trace for the national system and referring that to the local very quickly can probably get us even higher than 8 out of 10 and be even more effective. And a trial of that, I believe, in Leicester quite recently is showing that that could work very well.
If it's passing on that data in real time rather than daily, I mean, it sounds like it's not a big difference, but it really is when you're trying to trace the contacts of positive cases. That's what the local government association says public health directors need, that all that information is passed on to them in real time.
There's a huge amount of progress being made on data, and we've gone from a situation where directors of public health didn't have the right ability to track the virus locally. They now get that daily data granular by postcodes, age, ethnicity, etc. I think an even bigger step would be, completely shared real-time data that is happening on individual outbreaks but isn't yet happening on everything. And I think, again, that's the next stage where contact tracing could be a shared and more of a shared endeavour.
An important stage. I mean, you would support that?
I would support it, yeah, and I think it's starting to happen. I think we also need to take care that we don't get duplication between the national and the local system, and also that the local system has the capacity and capability to take on what is quite a significant role. So that's why we have the national system in place. It's consistent, it's extra capacity, it's needed, but when it can't reach the people that the local areas can, then that's when the data should be transferred, and we should get the local teams doing that.
Which parts of the country are you most concerned about?
I think the main thing to say is that lots of parts of the country are doing really well, and I think that gets missed sometimes. I think obviously there are quite stubborn areas of the country that can't quite get the virus down, that we know have been talked about. Another such as places like Leicester and Blackburn, etc. There is a challenge with the certain sectors. So the fruit picking and vegetable picking industry, there was an outbreak in Herefordshire recently that was dealt with extremely effectively by the local council and the Public Health England teams that work very closely together. I think that is an area that's been looked at more generally. I think we need to look ahead as well to the schools coming back, to universities particularly, with 2 million young people crisscrossing the country. So we need to work with the universities to make sure that we've got the right things in place there. But generally, I think that the system's working pretty well. The German system is often quoted, and what we've created, as well as the national test and trace now, is a very strong local system that is dealing with outbreaks really effectively every day.
They've got an app, haven't they, in Germany? Very successful app, it seems, certainly by the number of people who've downloaded it. Are we going to get one here, do you think? Is that idea still alive, and what do you think the time frame might be?
I think it is alive, and I think it will happen, and it's needed. It's not, the silver bullet, but it is something that could really help, as Dido Harding has said. I think it is probably needed most in places like London, where people use public transport more than the rest of the country, and we need the economy to kick-start, and I would expect that to start to be rolled out in in the next few weeks.
And just finally, we've been talking about testing at airports and how that might possibly affect the quarantine system. Are you in favour of that as an idea?
I'm sure that's been looked at, and I think the challenge has been that when the data comes in, people are having to make extremely swift decisions to avoid things spreading quickly, and I do have sympathy with that, and also sympathy with the people who are affected on holiday. Huge sympathy with that. I think extra testing could be an area that could, if it could help people not have to to know more about the virus quicker, then I'm sure that will help.
Tom Riordan, Chief Executive of Leeds City Council, thank you.
19 minutes to 8 is the time. Let's have a look at the papers and the news websites. And as they digest the government's decision to advise against all but essential travel to Spain's islands, the Daily Telegraph reports that the government is finalising plans to test arrivals from high-risk countries and to allow those who return a negative test to leave self-isolation after 10 days rather than 14. Germany, says The Guardian, is already introducing mandatory testing for travellers returning from coronavirus hotspots following a spike in new cases there. The Independent digital newspaper says that hotels in Spain have offered to pay for tests for foreign tourists in a bid to lure back visitors. We were hearing about that scheme half an hour or so ago. Meanwhile, the union representing immigration staff tells the Metro there's virtually no enforcement of the quarantine rules anyway, with only 4 people in England and Wales fined by the police or the border force.
The Daily Mirror casts a positive light on the situation, predicting that the measure could boost the UK economy by £3.7 billion as people choose to holiday closer to home. It says bookings for British campsites and caravan parks have doubled year on year. The director of Visit Britain tells the Daily Express that businesses have been working extremely hard preparing to welcome visitors back safely. The paper says what's needed now is a British heatwave to recoup our flagging morale and some of the joys of a summer holiday.
NHS patients waiting to go into hospital for elective procedures are being told they no longer need to isolate for 14 days first. The Times reports that the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence has concluded that falling rates of COVID infection and greater availability of testing mean that most people can follow social distancing and hand hygiene measures instead. The NHS Confederation said the blanket ban had put off some patients and said that new guidance would enable trusts to deal with a backlog of cases.
And the restaurant chain Nando's is said by the Daily Mirror to have begun feeding its chickens insects and algae instead of soya-based chicken feed. The scheme aims to cut the company's carbon emissions and impact on the environment. The paper points out that soya production is the second biggest contributor to deforestation after the beef industry.
For those reaching their older years, a study carried out by the Mail has found that daily internet use benefits their mental health. Researchers at University College London have discovered that so-called silver surfers are less lonely and happier with life, particularly if they maintain a network of contacts via email and social media. They say older generations should be encouraged to go online with user-friendly web pages, a larger text.
And after the government unveiled its plan to encourage the nation to avoid fast food and slim down, the artist David Hockney responds with a scathing letter to the Daily Telegraph, taking issue with it, labelling the Health Secretary and Prime Minister as Bossy Boots Hancock and Bossy Boots Boris. He accuses them of wanting to take the sweet things out of life. If no one smokes, eats chocolate or butter, cheese and bacon, they might live to be 104, he writes. Call that living?
16 minutes to 8.
My great pleasure to announce that the host of the 2022 Commonwealth Games will be Birmingham.
Well, that was the announcement, and now it is only 2 years away, 2 short years, until England's second city steps into the world spotlight and hosts the Commonwealth Games. The Chief Executive is Ian Reid and is on the line. Morning to you.
Good morning.
And tell us where you are, Ian, because that's quite important, isn't it?
Yes, I'm standing on the Smithfield site, very close to Birmingham city centre, and today, with 2 years to go, we're announcing the location here of 2 of our most exciting sports. So I'm currently looking at some of Team England's basketball players and beach volleyball players on 2 made-up courts here in this urban site, and we're announcing that we're bringing sport right into the city centre here in Birmingham come 2022.
And the kinds of sports that you think will have a wider appeal and a younger appeal, is that it?
Yes, absolutely. So we're conscious in the Commonwealth Games we need to keep moving and attracting a younger audience. So these are 2 sports that we're absolutely confident will do that. So the basketball format is actually not the traditional format, but the 3-on-3 format of the game. So a much quicker, shorter time period, fast-moving format of basketball. And then beach volleyball has been in the Commonwealth Games before, has attracted that audience, as you say, and is one of the really engaging sports for TV and for spectators.
2 big issues you face. The first, diversity. You had real criticisms, didn't you, that the board was almost all white. Are you sorting that?
We are indeed, and rightly so. We face some criticism. To give a little bit of background to that, our board is made up of nominations from various organisations who've put forward people with expertise, but absolutely right, it was not reflective of the region, so it is currently being updated. We've already announced one change and expect another few in the near future, so we've taken that on board, and yes, we will make sure that it's more reflective of the West Midlands.
Dame Louise Martin, who we heard, didn't we, in that clip, has stepped down, hasn't she, and been replaced. Are you saying that other people are going to step down and be replaced from the board?
So we've got a board meeting in a couple of weeks' time where that conversation and some proposals will be considered. So yes, I would imagine there will be further changes to make sure, as I say, that we're more reflective of the region here.
The other thing is the building of it all, the Athletes' Village, etc., which I don't think you're necessarily completely responsible for. But are you 100% sure, given everything that has happened and all the calls on money that there were anyway, and certainly are now, that you can get the whole thing up and running, and properly so?
Yeah, I suppose like any business right now, it's obviously uncertain times and there are challenges. We had a long discussion within our own board and our partners around the dates of our games, and we continue to be very confident, I should say, that we will deliver a fantastic event in the summer of 2022. The sporting calendar's moved around a bit, but we've got a slot in that we are confident now we can attract all the elite athletes from around the Commonwealth. But yes, of course, there are always some challenges. The capital projects still continue to go at really good pace, but as you would expect, those programmes continue to be under review to make sure we can get them over the line. So that announcement that you played right at the start with Dame Louise announcing that the games went to Birmingham, normally there's a 6-7 year planning window for these multi-sport events. That was announced with about 4.5 years to go, so we already started with a tighter timeline, but the really good news is everyone's pulling together here, and we're confident we can deliver a fabulous event on the original dates.
You really need a vaccine, don't you?
Well, look, absolutely it would help. We are hoping, with being 2 years away, that we're in a good slot in terms of hopefully being a vaccine or a significant treatment to ensure that we can get everybody together for our event. But as you would imagine, with any event, we're looking at what's happening in the world and making sure that we've got contingency plans as well.
Well, if there is a vaccine, and yours is one of the big ones to happen first, that would be quite something, wouldn't it, for Birmingham and for you. Ian Reid, thank you very much for talking to us this morning.
It's 12 minutes to 8. Time for Thought for the Day, and the speaker this morning is Hannah Malcolm, an Anglican ordinand at Cranmer Hall, Durham.
Good morning. The lockdown on places of worship has begun to ease, and after 4 months of attending online church, many Christians are rejoicing as they gather to celebrate the Eucharist. I remain at home, still unsure of how long it will be until I can safely join in person. For many, this was true before coronavirus. I have only experienced a brief taste of this restriction, and I know that it will eventually come to an end. And yet my grief over its absence persists. I long for the time when I can once again be invited to eat and drink alongside others gathered in worship. Last week I broke a different fast. My brother came to visit, and we sat at the same table and ate together. It struck me how much I had missed the pleasure of welcoming someone into my home and sharing a meal. And yet it remained a highly controlled experience, limited to someone I knew well, whose socially distanced actions I could account for. During lockdown, we retreated from uncontrolled encounters with others, strictly limiting who we saw, and for how long, and at what distance. Even now, as lockdown eases, attending church services is restricted to who arrives first, or even who books in advance. This is far removed from the hospitality Christians associate with the meal shared at communion. When we come to the Lord's table, our own interests are left behind. We are not in control of who is invited, who sits beside us, or the grace we receive. This tension is not limited to church congregations. We face a wider challenge concerning our sense of collective belonging and public trust. We are negotiating the anxious spaces shared by those who have returned to all but normal life and those who remain at home. As the latest quarantine rules indicate, we continue to tread murky waters, each step away from our tight circles containing potential danger. If we want to care for each other, we have to keep our distance. I am troubled by the contradiction this poses for each of us. Will we end up limiting our invitation to those we have chosen for our ever-shrinking circles? How will we react to the hospitality of strangers or come again to a table whose guests we cannot control? I don't know the answer, but as we negotiate the current pressure of constantly calculating risks, the temptation to become more suspicious rather than more generous is not one we can ignore. To be in communion, to be in common with each other, we will have to relinquish some control, leaving our own interests behind. Perhaps we will need to learn new ways to offer welcome.
And that was Thought for the Day with Hannah Malcolm. The time is 9 minutes to 8.
The government is adamant that the quarantine rules for Spain are right and they are to protect this nation. The Spanish authorities say they're making a mistake. They're calling for regional differences to be taken into account. And the poor holidaymakers, of course, left in Spain or indeed planning to go there or perhaps elsewhere have to make some pretty difficult decisions at the moment. We can talk to Simon Clarke, who's the Minister for Regional Growth and Local Government at the Department of Housing, Communities and Local Government, speaking for the government this morning. Morning to you, Mr. Clarke.
Good morning.
First question. The Daily Telegraph says quarantine is going to be cut to 10 days. Now, could you confirm at least that the government is considering changes to the quarantine rules?
Well, we always keep the quarantine rules under review in line with best practice and the advice that we get. But I would want to be clear with listeners this morning that the position is totally unchanged, that it is a 14-day period of self-isolation after you return from travel to Spain, either the mainland or the islands. We obviously regret the fact that's necessary, but it's in response to the data that we've seen, which shows the sharp uptick in cases, and it is therefore the right thing to do to keep the wider public safe.
Right, so you're being absolutely clear. At the moment, it is going to remain 14 days, but it is possible that it could be altered in the future.
Anything is possible, because obviously this is an evolving situation, and we continue to take guidance, as you'd expect, from experts about what will keep the public safe. But there has been no change to the rules this morning.
And is it the case that the rules were changed on Spain and the Balearics and enforced on Spain and the Balearics because there have been recent cases of people who have brought back the virus from there?
Well, over 2,000 new cases were reported in Spain last Friday, and that's why we took the action we did. There'd been a 75% increase on the numbers they've been seeing at the middle of the week, and so it was the right thing to do to keep the public safe, to prevent risk from being re-imported back into the UK. And I think everyone travelling at the moment just has to accept that there is a degree, I'm afraid, of uncertainty.
But was it re-imported back into the UK? Has it happened?
I don't have data on that, but what I do know is obviously that there have been these 2,000 new cases. It was therefore a risk that the JVC advised the government we needed to take action to close off.
Again, what the Daily Telegraph is saying this morning is that Chris Whitty addressed ministers and said, look, we have 10 cases of people recently in Spain who have come back to Britain and who've tested positive for Covid-19.
Well, it's clearly a risk that can materialise if there's a new way.
I'm unclear, though, about why it's not simply being, why we're not all being told, why the Daily Telegraph is brief, but why people and holidaymakers, because I think they'd understand it much better if the government just said, look, we've got these cases, they have happened after people have been to Spain, so for that reason we're doing this. It seems odd almost that if it is true, that you're not saying it openly.
Well, I can't say whether it's true or not. What I can say is that there have been thousands of new cases in Spain over recent days. Therefore, it's an entirely plausible scenario that people have returned to the UK carrying the virus as a result of that. Even if the risk is one which hasn't materialised, frankly, it's one that we have to close off, because there has been this sharp uptick in cases in Spain over recent days. We need to make sure that the hard work that we've done in this country, which has now got the situation substantially under control, if you leave aside a handful of hotspots, the situation in the UK is now really very reassuring. We don't want to see that undone by any risk imported from abroad.
So would it make sense? Would it make sense then for everyone who has recently been in Spain to have a test?
No, we're not advising that. Certainly, if you have been in Spain and then you show any symptoms, then we would certainly say that you should.
But we know that it's carried asymptomatically, don't we? Sorry to interrupt, but we know for a fact that there are large numbers of people who have no symptoms at all. If we're saying that Spain is a danger to us, why don't we test everyone who comes back?
Well, a negative test today doesn't necessarily mean you won't come down with the virus later, because the incubation period can take several days. That's precisely why we advocate this.
Well, they could have them after several days.
Well, there is widespread testing availability for anyone who shows the symptoms of the virus, but the point is it can take up to 2 weeks to materialise, Justin. So we have to do the isolation for the full 14 days to make sure that it doesn't. If it came through on day 13 and you'd had a negative test on day 8, that's no good to anybody.
And that then goes to the question we were talking at 7:10 to people who were suggesting, was someone who has a travel security firm, and also to a representative of the Spanish travel industry, who was saying actually what we should be doing is testing at airports, both ingoing and outgoing. And they were saying that they do it at Munich airport. The government pays if you're leaving, you get a test, and when you come back in, you pay yourself. Is that something at least that is being considered, ramping up testing at airports?
Well, we've obviously ramped up testing in the country enormously now. We have the capacity to do over 300,000 tests a day. But Baroness Harding, Dido Harding, who's the architect of our test and trace system, addressed this over the weekend. The fact is that a negative test, I'm afraid, doesn't establish anything, given the incubation period is up to 2 weeks, and therefore the requirement to self-isolate is the more effective tool to make sure that people who have been in areas where there is a higher prevalence of cases don't bring that risk back into wider UK society at a time where, as I say, we are making such important strides towards getting our own situation under control.
Final thought then, would you prefer it if we all stayed at home?
No, we're saying obviously that travel brings with it a degree of uncertainty in the current climate. We're in a global pandemic, and therefore we have to be able to respond to the situation as it evolves in different countries around the world. We've opened these air bridges precisely to allow travel, unrestricted travel, to where it is safe, but people have to understand that the flip side of that is, if the situation then changes, we have to take steps, and take steps quickly, to make sure that we address that risk. And that's not to say don't travel, but it is saying when you travel, just be aware that this is the reality that we're currently living with.
Simon Clark, thank you very much indeed.
It's 2 minutes to 8 if you're having that staycation. What weather can you expect? Darren Bett has the latest for us.
Yeah, well, it's drier than it was yesterday for sure. Today we've got a cool and brisk northwesterly airflow across southern England, South Wales, the Midlands, eastern England and northeast England. For much of the day it'll be dry, some sunny spells, just the chance of the odd light shower. Brisk and rather cool wind, mind you. Temperature 16 to 18 degrees, perhaps 20 in the southeast of England. For North Wales, northwest England and Northern Ireland, we've got some sunshine, but there will be scattered showers here. Those should become fewer during the afternoon, but a cold wind blowing, typical temperatures of 16 degrees. Windy in Scotland as well, sunshine and scattered showers, some of them heavy. Yesterday's rain is stuck over Orkney, where we're likely to find the winds touching gale force. Strong northwesterly winds for the rest of the country, and temperatures on the whole only 14 or 15 degrees in Scotland.
Darren, thank you. Now, tomorrow, one of the all-time great disco songs gets the soul music treatment.
On BBC Radio 4, Gloria Gaynor's I Will Survive. It's about the celebration of life. And that women deserve a life, that they deserve dignity and to feel free. One song, many emotions.
It became our gay anthem, and we got on the street and danced to it.
I learned how to get along. The series about the music that evokes powerful feelings. I got the survival suit, I managed to get it on, and that's when I started to sing I Will Survive. Soul Music, tomorrow morning at 9 on Radio 4 and BBC Sounds.
Seems a shame to interrupt that, but in the next hour of the programme, Chris Boardman will be talking to us about the government's new cycling strategy, and with the BBC adaptation of A Suitable Boy and with a hit documentary on Netflix, we'll be talking about modern-day arranged marriages.